headed to the gym and backing out of my driveway. I almost hit a freaking car who was in my blind spot, but also was speeding around a corner. Anyways, I wanted to talk about something that, well, I kind of started this topic yesterday, but I've been going back and forth with this person in my comments, which I'm not going to do anymore. I said what I needed to say. I don't make videos to argue with people. If you don't agree, you don't agree, but I'm just stating my opinion, how I feel. I mean, I don't mind people having discussions as long as it's respectful, but I'm also not stating how I feel because I feel this need to be right or that I need to argue with people. I just state my thought process. Anyways, I wanted to say this because I forgot to mention this in the video. But basically, I feel like the idea that, well, I've said this before. I honestly think like science is the religion of an atheist to a certain extent. And a lot of people maybe don't think of it that way, but an atheist puts all of their faith in science essentially being right. And if their worldview is that God doesn't exist, then they basically, like, science replaces religion for someone who's an atheist. But I feel like when I say that, people don't like it because they want to say like, oh, well, science is blah, blah, blah. But I feel like the truth about science is that science does not have all the answers, and science has been wrong a lot of the time, you know, and there's always new discoveries. But I just feel like the notion that science is like the answer to everything is just, to me, not, I would not put my faith in essentially science. But I think a lot of people confuse scientific discoveries as being like the end all be all. Like, if science discovers something, that it must be like that makes it makes science, you know, all knowing. But how I rationalize it is like science is discovering things that already exist. Like, it doesn't make, like, science is not more knowing because it discovers something that already existed. And I feel like the entire premise of science is the basis that we live in a world that we did not understand, that we did not create, and we did not design, and we're learning about the world that we live in because we don't have all the answers to begin with. So the notion that science can be the solution or is the way to solve or answer these questions, I feel like is not really I just feel like that's not, to me, it doesn't make sense, because if science had all the answers, we wouldn't need science. Like, science exists because we don't have all the answers, but it also means that science is discovering things that that already existed. It doesn't mean that science can't answer a question for something that it's seeking to understand. I hope this is making sense, but maybe I'm not explaining it well. It's basically like, if I create a program, essentially, and this program is just running the way it was designed to run, but and this is where the whole argument of just like, I feel like the existence of God, I do think, is logical for a lot of reasons, but I also think it's like people don't recognize like the greatness in humanity's ability to question God, because God gave us free will, and basically like we're allowed to question the things, like we can question our own existence because God gave us a mind the way that He has a mind, because God says we're made in the image of God. we have our own will, essentially. Like, it's not, you have to submit yourself to God's will in order to do the things God wants you to do. And I feel like a lot of atheists try to say like free will doesn't exist, but I don't really understand where that comes from, because I'm like, you being atheist honestly disproves that already. Like, I don't think Christians believe in a God that's forcing you to believe in him or forcing you to not believe in him. Like, you have the will, you have your own will. Like, God is not forcing you to do something, and if he is, then why would you're saying God's forcing you to not believe in him or forcing you to make choices that go against the Bible, what he commands in the Bible? Like, to me, that argument doesn't make sense. But whether or not you believe in free will or not, I think it's just important to recognize that your ability to question things is a gift, God-given gift, because do we create things? Like, the things that humans create, like, let's talk about artificial intelligence, which I feel like is the, I feel like artificial intelligence is like humans' attempt to create life, essentially, but it's like all computer generated. And if you think about like dimensions, and I feel like I remember someone explained it the best when they talked about like a simulation. When you're playing a game and your character is a representative of you, but it exists only in the dimension of your, 2D computer, whatever. So it's like your character in the, like, you exist outside of the game, but your character in the game is being controlled by something outside of that 2D dimensional world. But if you act like, it's basically like the spiritual world is us playing the simulation in the 2D, but we are limited in our current dimension to what the parameters, like, we're in a limited dimension, essentially. And God exists in a dimension that is higher than ours. So we are limited to what we can understand because we exist in a dimension inside of the dimension. It's a dimension God created, right? Like, that's, I don't know. I feel like understanding that can help people understand like how that works, but I also don't know if I'm the right person to explain it, because I'm not super knowledgeable of like dimensional things. But if you think about like 2D cannot understand 3D. 3D cannot, it's like they exist within 4D, but they can't really comprehend that dimension because they're limited in the current dimension that they're in. And so when you try to explain, the existence of God is outside of our dimension, but it doesn't actually take away from God's ability to work in our dimension. And I feel like a lot of atheists, I guess, actually reject God because they know science can't prove God, because it goes beyond what science is able to prove. Which is because science is limited to an observable, measurable world. It's like, how can a 2D can't define 3D, because 3D exists beyond what a two-dimensional world can prove, and science is limited to the physical realm, so it can't prove something in the physical realm because it's actually limited. But that doesn't mean that God doesn't exist just because science can't prove it. But that's essentially, a lot of atheists, in my opinion, reject God because science doesn't have the ability to prove or disprove God. But God exists outside of what science could even prove to begin with. So it's like, it's not really an argument to say, because science can't prove it, therefore it doesn't exist. Because science is humans' creation. It's like, you can only, like in the Sims game, you're limited to what that character is limited and what it can do, because it exists in a world that is beneath our actual reality. But it's just like, even with the Sims game, it's like those characters don't necessarily act in their own free will. It's like there's someone outside of it controlling it. But when we, I guess, think of our actual relationship to God, it's like God created us with the ability to act in our own free will, which is not something that humans have been able to create. And I feel like artificial intelligence is the attempt to do that, just like computers were invented because they were trying to replicate the mind. It's just like we are constantly trying to replicate ourselves in our creation, because we understand that we are a unique creation, if that makes sense. Like, we're constantly trying to mimic ourselves or mimic the things that, it's like God created things that are far beyond, far more intelligent, far more complex, far more, it's just like there's more technology in your DNA than anything else that we've ever created as human beings. There's more complexities within ourselves. God even says that we are his greatest creation. That's in the Bible. So it's just like the human body is actually, and human beings in general, is one of the greatest things, technologies, most advanced technologies on the planet. But we don't think of ourselves as being technology, right? We think of our, like, we don't view ourselves as technology. But when you understand or think about it or try to relate it to like being a really advanced like technology, think of human beings as a technology. It's like far more advanced than anything we've ever created. There's far more advanced technology within plants, within animals, within the universe than anything that humans created. And it's because God created us in a realm that is outside of our dimension. And therefore it's like greater. Like the dimension outside of ours is always going to be greater than the one you exist. And so I think what humans try to do is create things that mimic ourselves, but we're limited because we didn't actually, like, someone is yelling at their child. Anyways, I'm losing myself. Basically, I just think science is limited. It actually is limited to what it can understand. Science is not as, it doesn't have all the answers either. And scientific theories that people try to pretend are proven beyond the shadow of a doubt are not proven. They're theories supposedly that use logic and reason, but there also are logic and reason that is biased towards some of the, biased because it can't include the obvious things that we know that go beyond what science can prove scientifically, right? Like emotions can't be proven scientifically. Your mind is a concept that can't be proven scientifically. That's why I said when I study psychology, it's a pseudoscience, because even though there's scientific thought and scientific processes behind it, you can't measure emotions. You can't measure a feeling. You can't measure the mind. And the mind is actually a concept in itself. Like, we have a brain, yes, and we can study the neurons firing in your brain, but your mind, we can't see a thought. Can you see words? You can see words when they're written, but when you see speech, you can measure the waves. It's like there's a physical side of ourselves that can be measured, but you can't actually measure your mind. Like what controls your brain, what controls your mind. You also can't measure life. You can tell this person is alive or this person is dead, but how do you measure how alive or how dead someone is? Or what I'm saying is like what makes you alive is something that, it's like your heart can continue beating even if you're brain dead. And I think that's why they said like you're not pronounced dead until your heart stops beating. Like, death is measured according to your heart, not your mind. They can keep your brain, neurons firing in your brain outside of your body. Like, we have the science to do that, but keeping neurons firing in the brain does not make you alive. Your heart just beating also doesn't make you alive if someone's brain dead and not able to control their mind. So it's like there's all these aspects within our body that all add up to life, but when you think about what actually makes someone alive or not, it's more than just, you know, neurons firing and your heart beating and things like that, because it's like a sum of a lot of complex things have to come together, have to exist in order for you to be living. But I also just think there's a lot of well-known like experiences people have that are not scientifically explained, or that science can't actually explain or can't give a explanation for. And I feel like that's like the whole reason. It's like a belief in science is limited, but at the same time, a lot of atheists are ready to believe scientific theories that also are not proven with the scientific method, as in they're not observable, they're not measurable. The Big Bang is a theory. Evolution is a theory. There's been a lot of scientific theories that have been disproven after the fact with new information. It's like science is constantly changing. It's not stable, right? And it's also like it's limited because you are discovering things that exist in the world around you, but we're limited as far as you can't know something fully if you don't create it. Like the things that humans create, we can understand. We created them. But the things outside of us that we did not create, we have a limited understanding of. We're guessing, we're assuming, we're observing, we're discovering. But I'm just like, how can science answer questions on something if science is just discovering things that already exist? Like, it's like you're giving credit to science, but science didn't actually create the discovery. I don't know. Does that make sense to people? It's like, like naming, like, I guess Isaac Newton, whoever discovered gravity, I'm pretty sure it's credited to Newton. He didn't create the gravity that he discovered. He just put a name to a process that existed. He didn't actually create it. Gravity was not Einstein's creation. It was his observation. And it's just like we're acting like science is the answer to science is the knowledge, but it's actually it's just discovering things that already existed. It's discovering knowledge that already existed. We just didn't know it. So I don't know. I still think it's like not necessarily the best or most trusting source to get all your information from. And I always just think about it if the smartest person on the planet doesn't have all the answers to everything, it's like, why am I putting my faith? And it's just like, with more time, we'll be able to know. It's like, I'm not going to be alive for millions and billions of years, which also I'm not necessarily a believer in the billion years measurements. I feel like there's so many things that I also just question about carbon dating and things like that. Essentially, even if you just think of like the first law, what is it? Newton's first law, whatever it is. Basically, nothing can be created or destroyed. Is the theory, that's a scientific law, but then we have the theory of the Big Bang, which if it wasn't created or destroyed, where did the matter come from? Where did the energy come from? It's just like the Big Bang doesn't even follow the Newton's first law, wherever the law is of matter can neither be created or destroyed. If matter couldn't be created, then how did the universe begin? And it's like you have this theory called the Big Bang that doesn't even follow the first law. Anyways, Because we can't actually create matter. We can see how matter changes. You know, it can go from a liquid to a solid to a gas, whatever, but it's like nothing actually, as far as we know, is destroyed. It's just, you know, changes forms over time. But I don't know. I definitely think, though, I don't agree with the notion that science is the end-all be-all of knowledge and of understand, like, is the only way to understand the world around us. And I believe what God says in the Bible, like, human knowledge is useless. It's like, we think we know so much and we actually don't. We don't even know. Like, God says, like, our knowledge of the world is, like, not even, he tells it, like, there's so many basically times in the Bible when he just basically talks about how humans think their knowledge of the world is so vast and, like, they know so much. And he's like, y'all don't even know, like, an inch of all of the knowledge there is to know. So it's just like, I feel like being humble enough to recognize you're not the smartest thing in the world, and I guess that's what humans believe, they're the smartest things. But you know what's even funny? I feel like even atheists aren't intellectually honest with certain things, because then they'll be like, there might be aliens out there who know, and they'll be like, yeah, the existence of aliens. Have y'all seen an alien? No. Have you met an alien? No. But you believe that aliens could exist? You believe in the possibility of aliens, but you don't believe in the possibility of God? It's like it's like, it don't make it make sense. Make it make sense. Supposedly NASA had recently came out that aliens exist or whatever. It's like, y'all, I feel like it really has just gotten to the point that you will come up with any excuse, any theory to not believe in God. A lot of scientists reject the theory of intellectual design, even though it's based off of, you know, irreducible complexity, which is a true thing, you know. There's certain things that it's not possible to evolution. You have to believe in adaptations and mutations, but there's irreducible complexity where it's just like, you have to have certain things all have to happen at once for your existence. And I remember even when I was learning evolution in like 7th grade, my teacher had said how, you know, basically they had to backtrack on this idea that it was slow adaptations over time, and that based off of new evidence, now we have this understanding that all of these changes actually happened in a short amount of time, because you can't adapt, like, basically you can't adapt one necessary function of your body without the other. It's like all of these, the sum of our parts, it's like everything in your body is pretty much needed for you to exist. So it doesn't actually follow that you could, you know, I'll just randomly develop this part of my body that my body doesn't already need. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't actually logically follow the original theory I guess Darwin had. But anyways, I definitely think like science, a lot of people use science as an excuse to not believe in God. And I just like to point out how science has been wrong. Science does not have all the answers. Science is limited as far as a lot of things. Science can't give you meaning to life. Science can't answer a lot of life's tough questions. Science doesn't even give a reason for evil existing. What is evil? What is good? Science honestly doesn't have an answer for a lot of things that I feel like actually matter, like morals, like love, like emotions, like feelings, like your mind, like the meaning of life itself. Science, I feel like, just leaves you with, it's just like, we exist, we can observe the world that we live in, okay. But it really doesn't answer, in my opinion, anything meaningful or purposeful. It's just, you know, science attempts to understand the world that we live in, and that's pretty much about it. But whether we understand the world we live in or not, it doesn't change that our existence. It doesn't change that we have this experience in life, that we experience certain things in life. So I feel like, again, if you want science to be a religion, if you put all of your hope and faith in science, good for you. But in my personal opinion, it doesn't really add much to my life following the science or believing scientific theories have all the answers. I feel like God just gives me a lot more sense of peace, because it's just like, okay, I might not know all the answers and science might not know all the answers, but at least I can believe that there is someone who does know. At least I can trust that there's a purpose behind the world that we live in. There's a reason for all of these things. There's just like actual meaning to life, I feel like, with God. Without God, I feel like it's just like we just live and die, and there's no really rhyme or reason to any of the things that people go through in life. Like, what's the point of suffering? Why does suffering even exist in a world that was created out of nothing, from nowhere, for no reason? Where does suffering come from? Where does evil come from? Where does violence come from? Where do all of these, like I said, the actual things that affect your daily life are not really scientific, which is why it's just like, to me, it's pointless to even, I don't want to say it's not pointless. I guess you get the scientific advancements or whatever, the people who study, but I also feel like people who study science just to make a point of like, you don't need God. I mean, doctors use science to help people at least, but it's just like, I'm just coming up with a theory about how the world existed because I want to prove God doesn't exist, or I want to prove how the world existed without God or without a creator or whatever. That to me is not necessarily a good use of my time, because what do you gain? What do you gain from that? I also think it's just like, religion has existed since the beginning of time. As far as anyone can tell you, it's just like, why do so many people have a religion? Why is belief in God so, like, even if people don't believe in the same God, even if people don't follow the same religions, it's just like, it's normal for most people to believe in God. Why would that be normal? Why would the majority of the world believe in some form of God or some higher power if it wasn't why is that a universal experience? It's like, people having a religion, even if it's not the same religion, is like it's a normal thing. And I guess like atheism is growing seemingly. And I think atheism in my opinion, I do think is growing in this, based off of the scientific world essentially pushing atheist beliefs in school and in education. Like, they definitely don't, I definitely feel like people don't recognize this, but science wasn't always separate from religion. And science was actually a part of the early church at one point. I think, what's his name? What's that doctor's name? That Canadian doctor who's known for, all of his, Jordan Peterson. He made a whole series about it, talking about, how Christianity and religion were like affected a lot of the things that we have in society, and people don't realize, like, the Bible itself is one of the most important historical artifacts in existence. But there's just a lot of things people don't recognize, like how Christians or the belief in God even shapes like the laws that we have, the morals that people hold. Without religion, why would where would the idea that it's wrong to murder come from? And I guess that's a whole nother argument people can make, like the argument of morality. Where do morals come from or whatever? But again, my whole point of this video was basically just expressing that I basically don't hold belief in science as like a staple of my worldview, or I don't put all my faith in science. I think people use science as an excuse to not believe in God, and I definitely think science has taken a more atheistic approach as far as its understanding. It's like there's a bias against even anything that could, point to God, which is why a lot of the scientific community rejects the intelligent design theory, and they just say, oh, it's just creationism, even though the theory is logical. If you actually look up intelligent design, the theory is very logical and it makes a lot of sense, but people are rejecting it simply because it goes against what this atheistic science world doesn't want to accept any type of evidence or any type of theory that points to an intellectual being existing, because that sounds too much like God, and we can't prove God scientifically, so we can't use anything outside of that mentions something outside of, I guess, or that even just sounds like God, which is crazy to me, because again, the theory makes a lot more sense than a lot of things that we have in our society, in our current society. So it kind of just seems like it's more important that y'all don't have, it's like, it's really just science in my opinion has really become anti-God. And that's why a lot of atheists use science as an excuse for why they can't believe in God, because atheism has taken over the scientific world. And it wasn't always that way, in case you didn't know. Anyways, I'm about to go to my Zumba class, so that's all I have for y'all today. Peace.